The first wave of feminism is traditionally considered between the late 19th and early 20th century. The kindling for the first wave came from the position women held in the United States and what rights they maintained, which was essentially equal to those of white children and African American slaves. Women were legally prevented from owning property, executing wills, signing legal documents, voting, refusing sex with their husband, attending school, legal custody of their children, and from divorcing their husbands. This onset of legal barriers led some women, such as Elizabeth Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, to begin their plight against the socio-political norms regarding women of that era.
Do I not feel that the time has come for the question of women's wrongs to be laid before the public? Did I not believe that women herself must do this work, for women alone understand the height, the depth, the breadth of her degradation?
Stanton and Anthony jump-started this movement when they began planning the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, a meeting in which the social, civil, and religious conditions and rights of women were discussed, and the Declaration of Sentiments was conceived. Alluding to the Declaration of Independence, which called for the freedom of America from Britain, the Declaration of Sentiments called for the freedom of women from the law. This convention was soon followed by the Ohio Women's Convention in May of 1851, where Sojourner Truth gave her infamous "Ain't I a Woman" speech.
Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women at the North all talking about rights, the white man gonna be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as any man when I could get it. And I could bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, seen most sold off into slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? And they talk about this thing in the head. What is it they call it? Oh, that's right, yeah, intellect. That's it, honey. Well, what's that got to do with women's rights and Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? That man in the back there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? He came from God and a woman. Man didn't have nothing to do with it.
The heavy influence of pro-women's rights activists led to the opening of the first co-ed university and school in the country in 1855, the University of Iowa. Soon after this, New York revised the Married Women's Property Act, which allowed them shared ownership of their children, a say in their wages and wills, and the ability to inherit property. Later, in 1916, Margaret Sanger opened the first birth control center in Harlem, although later she was arrested for this, but was able to establish the American Birth Control League in 1921, now popular under its revised title, Planned Parenthood. Finally, to bring an end to the first wave of feminism, but in reality only a short pause in the movement, was the passage of the 19th Amendment, which accomplished the main goal of first wave activists, giving women the right to vote.
After women gained the right to vote with the passage of the 19th Amendment, feminism became less visible during the middle decades of the 20th century. This changed, however, with the rise of the Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam War protests, and other social movements for equality in the 1960s and 70s. With this came the rise of second-wave feminism. This new form focused on the domination of patriarchy and gender inequality in all walks of life, including topics like sexuality, family, the workplace, reproductive rights, and more. Second-wave feminism also focused on the battle against violence, with the establishment of rape crisis and women's shelters, as well as custody and divorce laws. With these private issues becoming public came the new motto, "The personal is political." One of the most pivotal moments in the history of second-wave feminism, and one of its founding moments, was the publication of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique in 1963.
A year ago, this woman heaved a brick through the rose-colored picture window of the American suburban bungalow and invited the resident housewife to take a clear look at the outside world. This book has sold more than 50,000 copies in the hardcover edition, and 700,000 have been published in paperback.
In 1963, a writer named Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, her scathing expose of the happy homemaker myth.
The feminine mystique has made us feel it's unfeminine to use our rights, to really want equality, to want to take part in the decisions of the world in politics. Career woman almost became a dirty word.
Betty Friedan had given up the chance for an academic career to become a homemaker and part-time journalist in the 1950s. Feeling there was something missing in her own life, she wondered if other women felt the same way.
She decided to interview her old classmates at Smith prior to a reunion. In doing that, she surfaced a deep sense of malaise among women who had very fine educations and then felt that they really didn't have choices, that there were no avenues for their talents, and were caught in some profound way.
A woman today has been made to feel freakish and alone and guilty if simply she wants to be more than her husband's wife, her children's mother, if she really wants to use her abilities in society. And
everybody read The Feminine Mystique. And of course, we all had mothers who suffered from the problem that has no name. They didn't know what was wrong. Why were they not satisfied by the 3 children and the perfect house?
Each suburban wife struggles with it alone. As she made the beds, shopped for groceries, matched slipcover material, ate peanut butter sandwiches with her children, chauffeured Cub Scouts and brownies, lay beside her husband at night, she was afraid to ask even of herself the silent question, "Is this all?" Betty Friedan, The Feminine Mystique.
Friedan later helped to found the National Organization for Women, whose purpose was to pursue gender equality and to protect the rights of women, including rooting out sexism in the workplace. This organization and others fought for legislative guarantees of equal pay for equal work, equal job opportunities, and expanded child care services. Due to this, the Equal Pay Act was signed into law on June 10, 1963, while the Civil Rights Act of 1964 barred employees from discriminating on the basis of sex. Second-wave feminism was largely successful, with the only major defeat being the failed ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, which was designed to guarantee equal rights for women. In the 1980s, the second wave dwindled down and went underground, with women's studies programs popping up at universities and colleges. Thus brings the end of the second wave of feminism. The third wave of feminism began in the early 1990s. Rebecca Walker, a bisexual African-American writer, coined the term third wave while drawing references to the fading effects of second wave feminism. In a 1992 essay, Walker expressed the voices that historically have not been represented or included in the first 2 feminist movements: women of low income, color, and non-heterosexuality.
Let this dismal of a woman's experience move you to anger. Turn that outrage into political power. Do not vote for them unless they work for us. Do not have sex with them. Do not break bread with them. Do not nurture them if they don't prioritize our freedom to control our bodies and our lives. Rebecca Walker, 1992.
Issues often tackled by these modern feminists were more abstract. While they fought for reproduction rights and workplace rights, these women also fought to enlighten girls of the Y generation by challenging traditional views of women and letting go of narrow-mindedness to accept all women into the movement. The early 1990s also saw the rise of another movement, one that is sometimes seen as the very heart of the third wave. This was the Riot Grrrl movement. Riot Grrrl was an underground feminist punk movement based in Washington, D.C. and the Pacific Northwest. Riot Grrrls often addressed issues such as rape, domestic abuse, sexuality, and most important, female empowerment. The most influential Riot Grrrl bands included Bikini Kill, Bratmobile, and Sleater Kinney. The movement encouraged women to be able to make their own place in a male-dominated punk scene, and therefore create a place where women would feel safe.
Riot Grrrl is because I believe with my whole heart, mind, and body that girls constitute a revolutionary soul force that can and will change the world for real. Riot Grrrl Manifesto, 1991.
Another medium frequently used by third-wave feminists to broadcast their opinions were fanzines. Fanzines are self-published magazines that cover broad topics, in this case, feminism, girl power, and oppressive issues faced by girls. Although quite underground, these publications spread the feminist message to many and helped to promote the third wave. It is often debated on whether the third wave ended in the late 90s or is still occurring. Many say there's now a fourth wave, controlled and discussed through the internet, while others refute that claim and say the third wave has carried into the 21st century. Whatever the case, the third wave of feminism has liberated young girls and all types of women, letting them choose who they want to be and giving them confidence to do just that.